right, so this might be a dangerous topic to discuss. And I can't really get into too many of these, but what about the origins of racism? What are the origins of racism, and how does it affect people and their views today? With the legacy of colonialism, cultural Marxism, socialist dogma and science, anti-racial science, 19th century Darwinist science, biblical racialism, race prejudice through history. Like, what are some of the doctrines and stuff, and how exactly did it come about? Like, how did it really all happen? Well, if we go back into prehistoric times, and we see the distinction of tribes and tribesmen and just primitive herding, hunter-gathering culture, right? We see that from the very beginning, animals, different species of animals have had to compete for resources, for food, for lodging, for habitat. Like, entire species were driven into total extinction because of a chain of competition. Out of this competition, we have apes, or primates, right? And the different competition between various hominid species, if you want, or whatever. And basically, I mean, for example, look at Neanderthal. Neanderthal and Cro-Magnon competed for resources, for food, for lodging, etc., etc. So this has been going on for a very, very long time. In the book of Genesis, Cain and Abel, the rivalry between the brothers Cain and Abel. And Cain had a natural inclined prejudice against Abel and killed him. When human beings started to learn how to farm, people started switching from hunter-gathering to farming and to settled, cultivated lifestyle. Land, for the first time, private land acquisition, the control of property and the control and feuding between clans became very common after the agricultural revolution. So, if we go to the Middle East, if you go to Mesopotamia and to Egypt and Babylon, you see a very long history of different empires, these old, really totalitarian Copper Age states, Bronze Age states that rise up. Egypt is the best known example. You have like these steles or steles on the Nile in the lower cataracts were like Pharaoh Imhotep, Ramses the Great. You know, they're demonstrating that they're taking hostages. The tomb of Tutankhamun has these frescoes, or these kind of this large fresco on the tomb that shows tribute from foreign nations to the Egyptians. And like the Egyptian pharaohs, you know, they were taking slaves and taking tribute from Canaanites, Israelites, the Philistines, and Nubians, and Libyans and stuff, and they basically saw them as lower breeds of people. Now, you could say that this is more of a distinct class phenomenon than it is one in regards to heritage. It's just really the Egyptians are whoever follows the Pharaoh and obeys the whims and commandments of the gods and the priests. You know, they would be considered culturally Egyptian. And I would agree. Mesopotamian, Egyptian, Canaanite, and Philistine, you know, these are more cultural terms than they are actual biological ones. But let's be honest, people. Even in ancient antiquity, man judged people and put their trust on others that looked the most like them, that were part of their clan, that were in their family, that were part of their caste, or whatever. And that's how human society has always been organized. There's always been slaves. There's always been priests and warriors or soldiers, foot soldiers. There's always been kings or pharaohs. I mean, that's just how it's always been. So, out of Sumerian, you have the evolvement of Semitic society, right? You know, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob all preferred their own kind. In fact, God commanded Abraham to only marry with people that were from the city of Ur, you know. Like Abraham was commanded by God to only breed with his own kind. You see this numerous times in the Bible, in the book of Joshua, the patriarch or the judge Joshua, you know, he keeps the people from marrying or into the Canaanites, breeding with the Canaanites. They are instructed by God to obliterate and destroy the Canaanites with full-on wrath. You know, like the Canaanites are all freaking slaughtered after the events of the Exodus. Samuel Smith has a good essay on the races that isn't Darwinian. Oh yeah, Penguin, privateer. You told me about that the last time we talked. Me and Mac talked to you in StreamYards. Yeah, I'm just talking about the origins of racism and stuff. But yeah, so, you know, let's go into the Bible a little bit. And the Middle East. You know, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were told not to marry with people other than Ur of the Chaldees. You know, there was a few exceptions, of course. Moses only married he didn't marry an Ethiopian. Like, he married a Midianite. You also have Ruth, who's a Midianite, or a Midianite, Ruth, that married in with the Jews, or the Israelites. So, you know, the Hebrews were commanded by God to not mix with the Canaanites, to drive them off the land and exterminate them. And you see this in 1st and 2nd Kings. Like, David is fighting the Nezarites, the Judaites, or the Gideonites, and just all these different intertribal warfare and stuff. Moses put her away according to the book of Jasher. You see right there, bro? So, Moses may have had a black Ethiopian or Nubian wife, but God made him give that up, bro. The Philistines are another good example. So like the Philistines are a type of Greek people. They're like Darwinian Greeks. Darwinian Greeks. that like invaded Palestine or the Levant, and they fought a race war with the Israelites. And like, you know, David and Goliath in the first book of Kings. What was that about? That was intertribal warfare, baby. King David of Israel was a racist. Like, King David was a literal freaking racist, bro. The Levitical priesthood. It's all about theocratic racialism, bro. Like, God commanded the Israelites on a religious and theological basis to be set apart from the Gentiles. From the beginning, the Jews were set apart from the Gentiles. Bro. The Levites and the different tribes were set apart and stuff, you know. And up in Russia, up in the Ukraine, you have the Indo-European Yamnaya steppe people. Like in Europe, the Mesolithic hunter-gatherers were virtually wiped out by the Neolithic farmers that invaded from Turkey, and then they were displaced by the Yamnaya people of the steppe that invaded into Europe in the Bronze Age and produced the bell beaker and the corded ware culture. So you have an example of Indo-European tribes fighting wars with each other on an ethnic and racial basis. You see this in the archaeological finds in southern, eastern, and northern Europe, where you see different types of like fertility gods and goddesses and idols being replaced with more patriarchal Indo-European gods, akin to Zeus, Odin, or like Zeus and Thor, Poseidon and stuff. And you see this aspect in the Odyssey and the Iliad. The essay by Smith proves, however, that people's way of life can cause physical/mental changes. Is this guy related to Joseph Smith, the guy that wrote the Book of Mormon in 1830? Well, anyways, in the Middle East, like Tutankhamun, like on his stele, he demonstrates that he bested the Libyans, the Nubians, and the Canaanites. Like the Ramesses, they completely wiped out and destroyed and just really effed up the Levant. You know, kind of really setting the stage for the Exodus, I guess. You know, and the Egyptians themselves were very prejudiced towards the Israelites, if you really think about it. Like, it took the 10 plagues before the racist Pharaoh would relent on freeing the Hebrews from bondage and letting them go out across the Red Sea. No, he was a Presbyterian minister. Interesting is his work on the archive.org. I know that James Ussher's Chronology of the World from the 1600s is available on the archive.org. So, yeah. Now, when you have the Bronze Age collapse, you know, up in the Aegean Sea, you have the Minoans, who were very peaceful people. You know, they built the first stable civilization in Europe on the island of Crete. There was also the Cycladian people, the Cycladians. So you have the Minoans. You know, they did not allow different ethnic people in their culture. They went to war directly with the Mycenaeans. And the Mycenaeans, you know, their society was very warlike in the Bronze Age. And they were fighting the Trojans or whatever. So if you look at the Iliad, or the story of the Iliad, you have Hector, the Iliad by Homer, the poet, the Greek poet, and the Hesiod, or the Hesiod. You have example of Greek heroes fighting people of different races, you know. You have the Greeks and Greek ethnocentrism of the ancient world, and it has a very profound impact on the European psyche. You know, the Mycenaeans and the Minoans were fighting and stuff. And the Iliad, you have a racial war with the Trojans. You know, the Asiatic Trojans and the European Greeks. The white European Hellenes versus the mixed white and Asiatic Trojans and other kind of Anatolian people. Then you have like the Assyrians and the Babylonians and the Persians. They're fighting wars with the Medes, the Scythians. The Greeks really despised the Scythians. Darwin refuted Christian Platonism by showing that the realms of ideas forms were not eternal. Of course, the Bible does not teach Platonism. That is true, Penguin, but the church fathers with the ecumenical councils introduced Neoplatonism into the church. So that was the problem. Saint Augustine was very well balanced in that he only was very much of a limited Platonist. Even though Saint Augustine was a Neoplatonist, you know, he kept it very limited in his works, like the City of God and stuff. But like the Greeks were very super racist. Look at how they treated the Persians at Thermopylae, and the Battle of Philemon. What was it? The Battle of Salamis and Thermopylae. Dude, that was Spartan patriotism, bro. The Greeks invented the term heroism and badassery. It was the Greeks that were the first red-pilled philosophers of antiquity, bro. You must not have that gigantic transformer substation behind his mom's house, Eric. Dude, I'm not wasting electricity. What are you talking about, dumbass? You're saying I live off the grid, but never has his living room lights on. Technically, that is off the grid. So yeah, the Greeks, they produced an extremely caste system that was more related to culture than to race. Alexander the Great despised the Persians. He loved their culture, but he despised their ethics. He literally saw the Persians as inferior to the Greek way of life. Built a gigantic Macedonian empire, bro. With the Romans, they fight the Etruscans. You know, they kick out the Etruscans, and they're fighting the Samnites, the people in Magna Graecia, where they adopt a lot of Hellenism because the Romans see the Greeks as brothers in race. That's not entirely correct. It wasn't Greeks from Greece. Almost all of the big Greek thinkers were from Anatolia. The Greek Golden Age didn't occur in Greece due to Greece being an S-hole. Dude, Athens is in Europe, pal. Maybe a lot of the pre-Socratic philosophers were from Anatolia, but it freaking happened in European Greece, baby. Like the laws of Lycurgus were in They were in Lycaonia or Lycaonia. All of the big philosophers like Sophocles, Plato, and Aristotle. And Aristotle was a racist. He called the Ethiopians blacks. And he referred to the Celts as whites. And said that they were all inferior to the olive Hellenes. And he referred to the Scythians as Asiatic or yellow. Gregor Mendel and Augustinian founded genetics. So anyways, you have a lot of these great thinkers and stuff. So the Romans, they take racial prejudice to a whole nother level. They absolutely stomp down the Gauls, the Germanics, the Samnites, the Etruscans, the Greeks, the Macedonians, the Egyptians, the Ptolemies. Like, they run the Mediterranean world. They kick down the Iberians. Like, the Romans are kicking ass and stuff, and they're very racist, dude. Like, they only give citizenship to only a certain amount of people, dude. Like the Romans or the Italians, they control a vast empire, but they only give citizenship to Italic people until like the 3rd century AD, and then they start giving it to foreigners. Unfortunately, because of that, that's why the Roman Empire was destroyed. Well, dude, the Greeks always lived in Western Anatolia until the Turks chased them out. Prior to the Turkification of Anatolia, all of Western Asia Minor was controlled by Greece. That was all culturally Hellenic. So anyways, let's talk about Jesus. Jesus Christ rejected the Canaanite woman. Like, Jesus rejected the Canaanite woman in the gospel, and he called her a horror. Like, he said that he had only come onto the lost house of the sheep of Israel. And Jesus and the apostles, they carried a certain amount of prejudice and racism, dude. Jesus Christ, Jesus Christ would have agreed with the cynics, dude. Jesus would have basically been a cynic if he was not ethnically Jewish. But Jesus was an example of a messianic Jewish nationalist. No, that was Mary Magdalene that he washed her feet with. So, Jesus Christ was a revolutionary. He was a theocrat and a racialist, dude. And the Bible is full of a lot of racial undertones and stuff. Look at the Ethiopian eunuch in the book of Acts. And look at how the Ethiopian eunuch submits to the superiority of Levantine Jews. Like, the Ethiopian eunuch has to admit that he is cursed with the curse of Ham. The soul doctrine is a major problem in Christianity. Well, supposedly it derives from the chain of being, and kind of from the idea or for the concept of an eternal realm of forms and ideas, right? That's where the soul doctrine is connected to. It's also connected with the mystery schools of antiquity. So yeah, Jesus and St. Paul were very base, dude. St. Paul said that he was from the tribe of Benjamin. St. Paul outright said that he is a Jew from the tribe of Benjamin. And he was very proud to be a Jew. And all of these other early church fathers were very proud of their racial superiority. They were proud Roman citizens of Jewish heritage. Was it Juice Danks who doxed the daimyo? Somebody called Christensen, who is a friend of Faith Vickers, allegedly doxed Ethan Hatchett, or something like that. Paul said he wished he was accursed for his kinsmen's sakes. Well, St. Paul was talking about how you need to be circumcised of the heart or circumcised of the spirit, and not physical circumcision. But he used to be a Pharisee, bro. His background was being a Pharisee in Jerusalem, and he was on the road to Antioch to kill Christians, and then he converted and became a Christian himself. Nah, lol, he revealed his real name from a different YouTube on stream. Too bad I like the Daimyo. Oh, dude, the Daimyo's okay, bro. He's funny, bro. I guess he's alright. So, the early church fathers were universalists, unfortunately. But they really got that from the pagan Hellenes and Romans. Like, the Greeks and Romans were not racial absolutists. They believed in cultural relativism, and the Christian church fathers adopted that universalist outlook, unfortunately. But, Tacitus says that the Germanic tribes were completely pure. Tacitus wrote in his Germania that the Germanic people were very pure and probably the purest and most thoroughbred people on the entire earth. He really coveted the purity of the Germanic people. So after the Roman Empire fell apart and the Middle Ages happened, you have lots of stuff going on. You have the Song of Rollo the Viking, the court of Charlemagne. You have the Viking berserkers and stuff. And dude, the Vikings literally did not give a two F's about non-Vikings. They enslaved and made thralls of everyone, dude. They made thralls of Irish priests. They made thralls of Picts, Gaels, Irish, Anglo-Saxons, Normans, and so forth, dude. Well, technically Normans came from the Norse. Tertullian was a biblical materialist, so it's possible to believe in the Bible without appealing to Platonism. What happened to the Judaizing aspect of the early primitive church? It really got extremely Hellenized very early on, even during the books of Titus and Philemon, or Philemon, And even the book of Hebrews rejects a lot of the Judaizing aspects of the Old Testament. Plato only transcribes an idea of reality. To your perceptions, it's not that hard. Ha ha ha. Plato was not a man of God, Eric. Plato said that there is only one God in the universe. He said that there is just one God. Plato was like a proto-monotheist. Just like, who is the father of Tutankhamun? Who is that heretic Egyptian pharaoh? Oh, well, I can't remember it. So anyways, in the Middle Ages, Europeans became very strongly ethnocentric. The Vikings were very ethnocentric. They enslaved Slavs, Celts, Anglo-Saxons, pretty much everybody. They enslaved everyone. And the Viking berserkers were very self-centered, very strong, very wieldy, powerful people, dude. Kievan Rus, Hungary, Poland, France, Flanders, the Holy Roman Empire, all these people were racist, dude. Look at the Crusades between the Muslims and the Christians, dude. The Mohammedans and the Christians in the Crusades. That's where a lot of modern racism, or at least Eurocentrism, really derives from, is from the Crusades, dude. All the different holy orders that took shape, you know. And this is not something that was just happening in the Western world, bro. The Chinese built a wall to keep out the Tatars. Revelation mentions tribes in the New Covenant, not one unified race. Well, the Bible says that anyone can get saved. So, if you read, 2 Thessalonians, it says that we are not, one is neither bond nor free, male nor female, Scythian nor Greek nor Jew, but one is saved in the bosom of Christ, or saved by the grace of Christ. Salvation and fidelity to God is not the same thing as tribal or racial affiliation. But yeah. So anyways, you have a bunch of holy orders, and you have a very strong ethnocentric Europe. And with the discovery of America, the Spanish conquistadors, dude, they conquer and annihilate the Aztecs and the Inca, bro. They're kicking freaking ass, dude. They're kicking freaking ass, bro. So let's go into modern times. You know, it's not just necessarily racial undertones to tribalism. There's religious undertones. Look at the Protestants and the Catholics and the Eastern Orthodox, and how they divide up and start to fight. And Martin Luther was very anti-Semitic. Martin Luther wrote The Jews and Their Lies, as well as his writings about the Pope being the Antichrist. And he also talked about the superiority of German culture. So yeah, you know, let's go to the New World here. Let's go to the New World in the 1600s with the founding of America. So really, racism in the modern sense of the term starts in the 17th and 18th century. It starts off with the notion of European superiority, which is true. It has more of a cultural and a religious and primarily Christian point to it until the late 18th century. So a Swedish scientist by the name of Swedenborg in the 1730s is the one that starts to invent the notion of scientific racism, which is something that begins or starts to really get into Eurocentric views. But the Curse of Ham remains very popular well into the 19th century. There's also the mound builder myth, the notion that a lost white race built all the mounds in the Americas, and they were wiped out and exterminated by the savage Red Indian. And because the savage Red Indians wiped out the civilized mound builders, this set the stage for the justification of civilizing and Christianizing the Americas. So that it was called the mound builder myth. There's some other myths called the Hamite theory. So the Hamite theory was the theory that a white African tribe, or a lost white African tribe of Hamites, invaded and settled and colonized Africa, and that they were wiped out and displaced by blacks. And this gave justification for Europeans to colonize Africa. So eventually these theories and the curse of Canaan and stuff like that was replaced by social Darwinism. So eventually, social Darwinism, scientific racism took over and replaced the curse of Canaan, or the curse of Laman in the Book of Mormon. So white Christians in the United States, in South Africa, in South America, especially in Brazil and Argentina, they were constantly having to fight like race wars, dude. The Spanish already had fought an 800-year reconquista against the Saracens and the Moors. And in 1492, the Spanish finally kicked out the Moors from Granada. And finally, that's when America was discovered, and Europeans really got out and started colonizing, and you have a lot of race wars with the Boers and between the Anglo-Americans and the Indians and enslaved blacks. You know, but the blacks were enslaved because they were seen as uncultured savages and heathens, and that they needed to be seriously helped. But you know, the Jesuit order supported the extermination of Native American tribes. It was the Jesuit order and the English Royal African Society that was the primary drive of the enslavement of Africans and their settling in the Americas. Hamites technically are fair-skinned. Henry Moss reverted back to such because he was living in a patriarchal Christian system. Hamites have only gotten worse under the modern liberal system. They have, bro. You know, black people did a lot better under Jim Crow than they are now. So anyways, you know, Oliver Cromwell and the Puritans and the Reformers and the Covenanters, you know, they fought a war in England, and Oliver Cromwell was a very strong patriarchal racialist, but he was also a very big supporter of the Jews. He let the Jews back into Great Britain. The Netherlands, or the Dutch, also let the Jews back in after the Dutch revolt against Spain. So a lot of Protestant countries were very pro-Judaic. Very pro-Judaic, unfortunately, I gotta say. That was probably the beginning of the cultural downfall of the West. Was when they started doing that. There was also a lot of biblical skepticism. A lot of freaking biblical skepticism that started happening in the late 1600s. You get to the Enlightenment, you know, the founding fathers were very racialist. Like George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, all these guys, you know, they thought that blacks were not equal to whites. Now, they did think that they could be culturally adopted into white American culture, but they didn't really think it possible. What's with the tomatoes, Thaddeus Slick? You don't like what I'm putting out here, boy? So anyways, America gets its independence and it expands in Manifest Destiny. 19th century is the high point, or the nigh point of imperialism. You have the Opium Wars, the Boer Wars, Afrikaner Wars. Ridepath has an essay on the Irish men of Flounders, showing how devolution comes about by a change of life. Interesting. I'd like to read that article. Weren't you part Irish, John, you filthy slave? Yeah, like, you've never heard of the Scotch Irish or the Ulster Scots, you fucking idiot. Like you would actually learn something, you stupid moron. Interesting. Are you talking about John Ridpath in his History of the Universal History of the World? Tomatoes were a key part of the story you're talking about. Oh, are you talking about the discovery of tomatoes in South America by the Spaniards when they got it from the Inca? This stream is boring. Give me a StreamYard link, FFS. Come on, dum-dum. Alright, so when we get to the 20th century... Well, actually, let's talk about the Confederacy. Really in the American Revolution, the Tories were actually a lot better than the Patriots. They were more conservative and more Christian than the deistic rebels. In the American Civil War, you have the notion of white supremacy on both sides. The Confederates believed in the inferiority of the black man and the necessity of keeping him in perpetual bondage. Like with slave indebtedness, slave codes, and just overall the notion of Nordic or European American superiority in the Confederacy. The North was more inherently Germanic. The North, on the other hand, was more Nordic and Germanic than Celtic Dixie, or the Celtic South, on the other hand. Actually, they were more stronger proponents of scientific Darwinism and racism than the South. Like the South was more biblical patriarchy, the North was into progressivism and industrial progressivism, but also scientific racism. So while they despised and hated slavery and wanted to bring freedom and equality to all men, including men of color, they still did not see blacks the same as whites. I mean, look at the Indian Wars, the white man's burden in Africa, like the white man's burden and all that stuff. So then we get to the Afrikaners, bro. Like the Afrikaners were like patriarchs, dude. They literally whipped black people for steering them the wrong way, bro. I'm not saying that that is a good thing. I'm not justifying that in any way. But I'm just talking about like how the Afrikaners had their Boer republics. You know, they had their Voortrekker republics, bro. They had their Voortrekker republics. They were pastoralists and they became small-time yeoman farmers, and the British just went in there and devastated and destroyed their property and stuff. It was horrific, dude. They were put in concentration camps. Now let's talk about Germany. Bismarck united Germany, and in World War I, Germany was at an unfair advantage. Like the Germans were treated very unfairly by the Allied countries. Like the Germans were humiliated and lost their colonies, and the monarchy abdicated, and they lost a lot of land to the Slavs and stuff. Now, it was, the Balfour Declaration, 1917, the Bolshevik Revolution in Tsarist Russia, I'm not going to name any names, but if you read the planned protocols of the learned elders of Zion, I mean, there's a lot to unravel there, but there's some interesting stuff. The Mormons and the Jehovah's Witnesses all supported the return of the Jews to Zion. Like a bunch of these extremely evangelical Protestant and ecumenical groups in America and Great Britain, they all supported the Balfour Declaration and the return of the Jews to Palestine. I just wanted to mention that. So what was the innate cause of World War I? What was the real driving revelation of World War I? Well, just think, dude. The learned elders of Zion, the Bolsheviks, the Balfour Declaration, etc., various ecumenical councils. Well, you don't really need a lot of time to figure out who really started the World War in 1914. And that was the beginning of the decline of white domination. If you look at Lothorpe, Stoddard, and Madison Grant's books, you can actually trace the beginning of the decline of white supremacy to World War I. Lots of books and lots of stuff about that, dude. So, that was the decline of the European powers. The Europeans killed each other and maimed each other for the Jesuit order and for Freemasonry for nothing, bro. So now we get to the Third Reich. So Hitler, this is not me, but I'm saying that Hitler said that it was a certain group of people that started World War I. And started the 1918 November Revolution. So the Nazis came into power and they created a racial cohesive regime, a racialist state. They had eugenics, they had policies of eugenics, they had an excellent top-notch military. Tanks, Tiger 1 and 2 tanks, V1 and V2 rockets, dominant and very powerful military and armed forces, very intrinsically interesting uniforms. And that's all I'm going to say. And the certain mustache man kept saying that it was because of Wall Street and Red Square that this war had broken out. But already from the beginning, Roosevelt and Churchill plotted for the genocide of the German people and for Europe as well. It was the downfall of Germany, dude. So there's the air war, the bombing of Dresden, the fire torching and fire bombing of Dresden. Yeah. The demise and the suicide of a certain mustache man. Maybe he went to Argentina. Maybe he actually went to Argentina. I don't know. So the Red Army committed mass rape. The Red Army basically lost 27 needless casualties for the sake of Bolshevism. They Bolshevized with Bolshevik barbarism half of the European continent. So half of Europe, through the Yalta Agreement, fell under Stalinism, fell under Soviet control. Eric agrees he's not a democratic socialist like Euros. This will be needed to save the West. The West cannot be saved, Eric. The West has been condemned by the Almighty Jehovah to perish for the sins of the Anglo-American establishment. It is divine judgment that the West will be destroyed as punishment for the sins of the Anglo-American establishment, the Jesuit order, Freemasons, and noses. That's all I'll say. So you have the air war in Germany, you have the invasion of Normandy, and you have the absolute destruction, rape, and pillaging, and cultural degradation and civilizational collapse of Europe, primarily Germany and Italy. The total ravaging and pillaging and destruction of Italy and Germany in World War II. And the fall of Europe to Americanism, mass American pop culture, and Bolshevism. That is the ultimate legacy of the war. Although it cannot be ruled out that they went to inner Earth, or the inner hollow earth, through a gate beneath New Swabenland. So we have decolonization and the rise of anti-racism, the end of scientific racism, the civil rights movement, the end of apartheid, decolonism, the collapse of communism, mass immigration to the West. And here we are now. So what is the ultimate legacy of this shit, dude? What is the ultimate legacy of living in this fucking shithole that we live in now? The Western world is too shattered by pantheistic metaphysics to be saved. People's minds have already been wired to accept what they have been taught. Social engineering, Skinnerism, Darwinism, social media, etc. It's impossible to change such programming. Unfortunately, that is true, bro. Alright, I am joining, the smithy, dude. I'm gonna go in the smithy. Alright, I'm going to start up another stream about open mic discussion. I guess I'll do an open mic discussion or whatever, dude. Go live. The daimyo's disappearance. What happened to the daimyo? Dang it, bro. This was a good stream, Warhammer. Thanks, bro.